From poaching and seafood fraud to tracking endangered species, a hidden world of crime is unfolding in our oceans and forests, and scientists are solving it with the precision of a real-life CSI. Joining us to share more on a conference happening right here in Charleston, let's welcome Dr. Rebecca Johnson, Chief Scientist and Associate Director of Science at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, and she's also the President of the Society for Wildlife Forensic Science. So thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm delighted to be with you.
What an interesting field this is. Maybe you can share with our audience exactly what is wildlife forensic science and how similar it is to traditional human CSI work.
Yeah, as you said, it's a little known area of science, but we think it's quite important. And as you said, it's just like CSI, but solving crimes mainly with wildlife, although occasionally we do work on insects that might actually be associated with human crimes as well.
Oh, wow. Now, how pervasive is this? Because we've experienced and we've had stories here in the Low Country of seafood fraud that I had mentioned earlier. Poachers, people catching things and not putting back what they should. Kind of a bait and switch, if you will, no pun intended. So what are you seeing sort of along our coastline here?
It's actually a huge area. This wildlife crime, in its broadest sense, is estimated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
Wow.
That's globally, but as you mentioned, a lot of that really impacts us here in the US. If you're purchasing seafood and it says that it's wild caught, we want to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for, and you want to make sure that you're actually getting the species that you think you're paying for. And so this is actually the science that we use to detect all of those things. So it's often really hard to tell what it is once it's filleted, for example, or once it's shelled or cooked. Yeah. But wildlife forensics can actually help you identify what species you're dealing with. It can even help you identify if it's been wild caught or farmed.
Very interesting. So how do you go about stepping in? I would imagine that it would have to get reported, but where do you come in along that process?
That's a great question. This kind of science is actually incredibly broad. We can be called in for intelligence gathering, so something that is trying to understand something that might be emerging as an illegal trade. That could be anywhere across the world. And unfortunately, a lot of animals are trafficked for sale in many different shapes and forms. Yeah. But we could also be called in by law enforcement, and that's to deal with a specific question. So there's a couple of recent cases from Charleston where the local fisheries laboratory for NOAA was actually called in to validate what was actually in some very large fish shipments. And they found, using some rapid technology, so we're always looking for new technology as well, that some of that fish was actually mislabeled and some of it was illegal, which unfortunately made the entire shipment illegal.
And you mentioned NOAA and their marine forensic laboratory. So is that how the collaboration sort of came about, that you're having this conference here in Charleston, which is quite significant because you meet every 2 years, is that right?
That's right. So we've been meeting every 2 years since 2009. During the pandemic, we had a 3-year time period between our meetings, but we tend to move it around. We move it all across different parts of the United States. There are some world-leading wildlife forensic laboratories in the United States, both federal labs and state labs. And we also sometimes have it overseas. So we're quite an international group. Wow. And this year we're delighted to be in Charleston because I don't know if many people know, you have one of the world-class marine forensic labs right there in Charleston, and they're doing amazing work with this really cutting-edge technologies and really helping us all through the work that they're doing.
That's fascinating. And I would also imagine, it extends beyond the oceans, of course, it extends into our forests. So there's a lot of game hunting here. And but this requires some cooperation and collaboration, I would imagine, from the public as well. And that's where it gets a little tricky, because unless it's actually reported to law enforcement, then it almost never trickles down to, or trickles up, I should say, to your level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so different states have different rules around game hunting and different conditions that they might issue a tag, for example. And we're all about making sure that people are doing the right thing. And so the people have gone to all the trouble of doing things legally. Are also really great eyes and ears on the ground, helping us identify things that we may need to investigate. And that's where these cutting edge techniques come in, which are very much like what you see in CSI in
Yeah.
human forensics. But we might be working on deer, or we might be working on
Right.
elk, or we might be working on eels. And so it's a really, it's never dull. And that's why we get together every 2 years, because we're a pretty small group. We're about 100 people worldwide.
Mm.
And we can really learn so much from each other by sharing our techniques. Sometimes we share our reference information, because it's not every day that you can find a sequence from perhaps a really endangered mammal, for
Sure,
example.
sure. All right. Well, you'll be coming down to Charleston. It's going to be very exciting. This is for scientists only, so the public does not necessarily need to be involved. But we're looking forward to seeing what comes of this conference and your continued work around the world. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us today.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. We'll be back in 2 minutes.